on with this. Okay, so we'll let you know about June, of course, when we get all the details. I'm praying that the weather is like it is today, and by the middle of June, hopefully we're going to be sitting outside and having a wonderful time. I know everybody is sick and tired of taking, staying home and going on Zoom probably. So, all right, without further ado, we shall introduce tonight's speaker, Janet, and I'm just going to read a little bit of this was in the connector, and what a stellar career you have had. Oh my gosh. So Janet Tolliver lives in Magnolia South, and she has been a resident there since 2004. She retired from running a family business, and she spent her time writing and has published how many books? 2? 3? Yeah, quite a few. And she has a new historical novel in publication sometime this year. So in researching for her new book, she came across all the information about Harriet Martineau. Is that correct, Janet? Okay. Who is considered the mother of sociology. And so we have come a long way in a lot of things, but this is very interesting, and I'm not going to go over that because she's going to talk about it. So please welcome and she is a member of Torch. So fellow Torch members, welcome another fellow Torch member as our speaker. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you everybody for coming this evening. As the little lead-in said, during the early days of COVID-19, a lot of people were either binge watching Downton Abbey or The Office, and I decided I would go mad if I had pursued anything on television. On my computer was the first chapter and the start of the second of a romance novel. I'd spent years toying with the thing while I was writing what I considered serious women's fiction. But I do want to hesitate to defend romance novels. After all, Jane Austen is the gold standard and of that particular sort of book. And I've spent many guilty hours poring over not only Austen and Georgette Heyer, but Daphne du Maurier and a host of women writers of romantic historical fiction. This past year did produce this novel, which I'm waiting for galleys on right now, and its sequel. And I considered venturing this whole venture something of mind candy, but at least I did want to write with passable accuracy. And the more I delved into the genre, the more I learned about the minutiae of the Regency period and the reign of William IV in England. I purchased an 1813 map, helpfully sent by a wonderful shop in London, and delved into the history of the period. In the process of writing the sequel, I began with Wikipedia. And I don't rely on its discussions of the era for finding out any sort, but it does have fascinating sources. And I soon discovered a woman named Harriet Martineau, a contemporary of the time who had written about the 30 years of peace in England, the years between 1816 and 1846. So I ordered the first of her novels, and I'm going to hold them up here on my picture. You can see them, not novels, her histories. They are not tiny books. In the process, I became fascinated with the lady, and she makes a cameo appearance in the sequel. In my rambling around the internet, I ran across a very recent, updated February 2020 article by a woman named Nikki Liza Cole, PhD. She's done a masterful job of researching Ms. Martineau's life, and I rely heavily on her research for this paper. Next slide, please, Bill. Hello?
Yep, I'm here.
Next slide.
And I'm trying to do the next
Okay.
slide.
Well, I'll go ahead and talk while you're finding it because it won't make any difference.
Bill,
Yes,
just hit enter.
it's not advancing.
Well, then try page down.
That's what I was
Or-
doing. Hmm. Am I locked
Well-
on just the one slide? I don't know why.
The house, it's a picture of a house.
Yeah, I know.
Can you page down? Hit page down?
It's not working.
Okay, then flip over to PowerPoint on your screen.
Well, that's the problem. I've got full screen on. And I can't even see the PowerPoint. Let me see here.
Well, you know, guys,
Try
I
to-
don't, we
Hang
really,
Try
on,
the
hang
space
on
bar.
just a minute and I'll see if I can.
Try space bar. Because it should advance.
Oh, here it is up at the top. Now, let's see. I just got to stop share for a moment and see if the thing will advance now. Yeah. Okay. So
There.
no, one before, please. Well, we skipped that one. There she is. That's Harriet. Let's go on to the next slide, Bill. I think I probably forgot to tell you to advance.
all right, let me see if I can use these commands to go forward. Because what should be working is not working.
Yeah, you're right.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Okay.
Yeah, there
Okay.
you go. Just
Okay, I'll just talk. Okay. Now I've lost my place. Born in this house in Norwich,
I'm sorry.
England. Okay, shall I continue?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, born in this house in Norwich, England in 1802, Harriet was the daughter of a middle-class owner of a textile mill. And as her French name would indicate, she was a descendant of a Huguenot family. She received some education as a girl. She and her sister Rachel attended a day school in Norwich and were also tutored by Mr. Perry. During her girlhood, the first signs of deafness occurred and she experienced a period of ill health. At this time, Harriet went to Bristol to live with her aunt. It was a happy time because her aunt ran a school. Her education ceased when she was about 18 and returned to Norwich. The boys in the family of 8, of course, went to college. The girls were expected to marry. The unfairness of this produced her first written work, On Female Education, published anonymously in 1821. She was 18 years old. And to quote Harriet from a later work, the sum and substance of female education in America, as in England, is training women to consider marriage as their sole object in life and to pretend that they do not think so. Martineau's impetus for taking up writing as a career came because her father's business failed in 1820. And for the rest of her life, she supported herself and her family by her writing. And as you have seen, she was prolific. In her own words, she said of the misfortune of her family, "But for the loss of money, we might have lived out the ordinary provincial method of ladies. with small means, sowing and economizing and growing narrower each year, whereas by being thrown, while yet it was time, on our old resources, we have worked hard and usefully won friends, reputation, and independence, seen the world abundantly, and at home and abroad, and in short, have truly lived instead of vegetating. She began writing for the Monthly Repository, a publication of the Unitarian Church. This resulted in her first commissioned work, a 2-year series of tutorials for the common reader on the works of such contemporaries as Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill. Mill's wife, Harriet Taylor, was a personal friend of Martineau's, and her series sold more copies than Dickens were at the time. The influence of Mill and Smith on Martineau's thinking and the work was considerable. Her thinking was also strikingly modern. She began as an advocate of the free market, but later in life became convinced the government needed to exert some influence over laissez-faire economics. Not adverse to changing her mind, she broke with the Unitarians and became associated with the free thinkers. In 1834, she had moved to London and mingled with such luminaries as George Eliot, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Thomas Carlyle, and next slide, please. Next slide, there we go. She continued writing mainly on politics and economics, but as this page of the index from volume 1 of her examination of the years of peace illustrates, these two subjects were hardly the limit of her investigations. I have chosen these pages random, even though I was writing about the year 1833 and impressed by the amount of important legislation passed by Parliament that year. That is the extensive Factories Bill, which included a number of child labor laws, and of course, importantly, the abolition of slavery in England. Ms. Martineau, most detailed account of legislation in her history of England at the time was the description of the passing of the all-important Reform Bill, overhauling the system of rotten boroughs existing at the time, thus making Parliament a truly representative body of the people. It would be like federal law in the United States reforming gerrymandering. It made Britain a true democracy, and Martineau maintained a lifelong interest in broadening suffrage, including women's suffrage. The index pages here, they're so small you can probably not read them, but they indicate the breadth of her thinking. There are I made general categories in the margin, but you can't see it on the slide. She wrote in kind of a long stream of consciousness way. It's not necessarily organized in any particular pattern, except for the dates. That's all. In this first column over here, it begins with military affairs and slides into the doing of Parliament to end the year. Then in 1830-31, she starts following, she begins with foreign affairs, starting with France and including countries in the Middle East, Africa, Eastern Europe, and then she goes into domestic affairs with the death of King William and the ascension of Queen Victoria. This entire next section covers the most trivial items to the all-important, from the Islington cattle market to the burning of the Houses of Parliament. The list includes statistics on suicide and dueling. What we might say the lady was data-driven. The section ends with a necrology and an appraisal of the arts. Her almost all of 1875 and 8 and 9, the last columns taken up with public affairs, but it still includes commentary on individuals and reporting on the statements of the men involved. This gives you an idea of her encyclopedic curiosity. To cite a few examples, on opposition to the Recovery Act. Quote, when we remember that the minority sincerely believed that they were now witnessing the last days of the Constitution, we cannot wonder at their determination to avail themselves of all the forms of the House and every passing incident to delay the destruction of the country. They avowed their purpose and to adhere to it with unflinching obstinacy. The House went into committee on the 12th of July. It was at once evident that every borough was to be contended for, every population return question, and every point debated on which an argument could be hung. And this is not on account of the merits of the case, but merely to protract the time and leave room for fate or providence or something to interfere, which reminded me a little bit of some of the doings of Congress this last year. I like to refer to this lady as the Rachel Maddow of her day. Lots of facts, lots of commentary, lots of history, as I say, lots of commentary and lots of attitude. Her comments on the arts, particularly the stage, which was losing its great names of the century before, such as Mrs. Siddons, are case in point. And she refers to these people as, quote, stars. Speaking of Edmund Kean, she said, quote, Kean was a study as interesting to the mental philosopher as to the playgoer. So extraordinary was his possession of this single gift. It would appear before him that such an actor as Kean must require a large variety as well as a high degree of intellectual ability. Yet he never manifested any power of mind at all above the average, hardly indeed to the average, anywhere but on the stage. Riots seemed to be something of a constant during the time. The unrest in Ireland and the French Revolution weighed heavily on the English, and there was great fear that it would spread across the channel. Quote, nearer home too, a strange new trouble was arising, which was extremely difficult to cope with. A year or two before this time, English gentry had been holding up hands and eyes at the atrocious barbarism of the peasantry of northern France, who burned their corn ricks in the night. People observed to one another the awful state of stupidity and malice in which any society must be sunk when such a crime could spread, a crime so foolish, so suicidal, and as well as malicious. What could induce a peasantry to destroy their own food? What a set of idiots they must be. But as soon as the long dark nights of October and November came on, the same thing was happening in our own agricultural counties, and particularly in Kent. You will remember, I think, that this was the time right after enclosure. Martineau spends a great deal of time on biography and the doings of the royals. It was as much fodder in those days as it is today for commentary. About the ascendancy of Victoria to the throne, she said, one of the strongest and most genial interests of the period now closing was the young queen. If kindliness and open heart of William IV had been refreshing after the temper and manner of his predecessor, the youthfulness and gaiety of the new sovereign was now really exhilarating after the spectacle of so many years of foolish old man in a royal carriage. Mrs. Martineau also was quotable on a lot of things. On inquiries, she said, it is my deliberate opinion that the one essential requisite for human welfare in all ways is scientific knowledge of human nature. Charles Darwin called upon her in 1836, and he was a friend of her brother's. He found her ugly. Next slide, please. But was impressed by her writing. She described him as, quote, simple, childlike, painstakingly effective. I put this slide up here because in my personal opinion, Martineau, although she was no beauty, she was hardly ugly, at least in her younger years. One of the anti-feminist things that she had to endure by the press, especially when she came to America to add her voice to the call for abolition of slavery, was the charge that she was exceedingly ugly. She stayed in America for 2 years. One of her hosts gave this more humane description of Harriet. He said, "We experienced an elegant, talented, good woman. We did not expect, in addition, all this, a lively, playful, childlike simplicity, breathing, loving creature whose moral qualities as much outshine her intellect as the last do. In the ordinary run of mankind, I do not think a woman ever lived who had such power to inspire others with affection." An excellent writer, the lady was eminently quotable and had her own view of men. She said, "Men who pass most comfortably through the world have good digestions and hard hearts." Also, she had views of marriage. She said, "Anyone can see at a glance that if men and women marry whom they do not love, they must love those whom they did not marry." I wonder if this last was occasioned by her friendship with the Millses, who had for some 20 years a relationship and did not marry until Harriet Taylor's husband died. Not completely adverse to marriage, she was engaged for a short time to a friend of her brother's, a Mr. John Hugh Worthington, who unfortunately suffered a bout of madness and died. As I mentioned, Martineau spent 2 years in America in the cause of abolition of slavery. Called upon in Boston to make a few remarks.
Janet, you appear to be frozen.
And that I consider slavery to be inconsistent with the law of God and incompatible with the course of providence. I would certainly say no less at the North than at the South concerning this utter abomination. And I now declare that with your principles, I fully agree. For such remarks, she was threatened by individuals and vilified in the press. Plus, plus les change, la même chose, to quote French, the more things have changed, the more they stay the same. Martineau's 2-year stay in America resulted in one of the earliest sociological studies using analytical methods. It was entitled "The Theory and Practice of Society in America." Secure in her finances and still producing writings, Harriet endured a period of extremely ill health between 1835 and 1839. Although nearly housebound, this did not stop her writing. Observing the interaction between doctors and patients, which she considered one of domination and submission, Martineau wrote, quote, "Life in the sick room." The publication did not endear her to the medical community. Her curiosity continued also, and she underwent a series of treatments in mesmerism, as hypnotherapy was known at the time. Following her recovery, she traveled widely, including Egypt, Syria, and Palestine. Next slide, Bill, please.
Mm-hmm.
This is a partial list of her writings. Illustration on Taxation, 5 volumes. Illustration of Political Economy, 9 volumes. Theory and Practice of Society in America, 3 volumes. Retrospect on Western Travel, How to Observe Morals and Manners. Deerbrook, a novel. Playfellow, a children's book. 3 volumes of Forest and Game Law Tales, and of course, The History of Peace. She also wrote the positive philosophy of Auguste Comte. She didn't write that. That's a translation. And her translation was considered so fine that Comte himself had it retranslated into French. All the while, she wrote at least weekly for the Daily News and contributed to the Westminster Review. She retained her interest in the arts, becoming a friend of Wordsworth after she built a small house in Ambleside. In addition, she was always the activist, continuing her interest in women's issues, suffrage, and the repeal of the Contagious Disease Act, an act of Parliament which attempted to force poor women suspected of prostitution to confinement and physical examination. Harriet Martineau died at her cottage in Ambleside in 1876. Her lasting contribution was her influence on the examination of society. In her own words from How to Observe Morals and Manners, quote, "The grand secret is to begin with the study of things, using the discourse of persons as a commentary upon them. Though the facts sought by travelers relate to persons, they may be readily learned from things. The eloquence of institutions and records in which the action of a nation is embodied and perpetrated is more comprehensible and more faithful to that variety of individual than any variety of individual voices. The voice of a whole people goes up in the silent workings of an institution of a nation, political, religious, and social. Put evidence into the observer's hands as its capabilities wants, which the study of individuals could not yield in the course of a lifetime. The record of any society, be what they may, whether architectural remains, epitaphs, civic registers, national music, or any other of the 1,000 manifestations of the common mind, which may be found among every people, afford more information on morals in a day than the converse with individuals in a year." Although Harriet Martineau was turned from the Unitarians into free thinking, which prized reason, logic, and empiricism over authority, tradition, and dogma, she retained to the end a remarkably wholesome and serene attitude toward life. And I leave you with 3 quotes. First, "Of posthumous fame, I have not the slightest expectation or desire. To be useful in my day and generation is enough for me." She also said, "You had better live your best and act your best and think your best today, for today is the sure preparation for tomorrow and all other tomorrows that follow." And lastly, "We do not believe in immortality because we can prove it, but we try to prove it because we cannot help believing in it." Thank you. We have time for questions. I don't know whether I can answer them or not, but as my father used to say about me, just if you don't know, ask Janet. She'll tell you whether she knows or not.
Yeah, raise your hand and I'll unmute you if you have a question. Okay.
Janet, so she wrote in her own name. Wasn't there discrimination against women writers at that time period? I mean, I'm surprised that she didn't take a pseudonym.
No, she did. The only thing that she wrote was the first thing anonymously.
Okay. And
But
so
she wrote under her own name because of the second bunch of stuff that she wrote was a commission. And it was the exposition of various economic theories. And so,
Okay.
it was an academic thing. So she didn't, there wasn't any reason for her not to publish under her own name.
How much education did she have at this girls' school that she knew that much?
Not much. She was pretty much educated. I think the thing that happened when she was in Bristol with her aunt was that at least she continued in school. And so she probably did learn, at least something while she was down there. But it just enhanced her feeling that women ought to be as educated as men.
Well, it's certainly true. And boy, a woman getting an education in those days was really difficult. I commend her for that. That's for sure. You know, we had, I mean, you know, as well as I do, that when I went to college, and you guys probably the same thing, women only became teachers, nurses, or secretaries, and that was about it, you know? So,
That's about
Thank-
right. I knew one woman doctor and one woman lawyer growing up.
yeah.
Janet,
Yeah.
you titled this the founder of sociology. I was just wondering if, since I went to grad school in the social sciences, and I fully admit that I never heard of her, never saw a reference to her. And what my question is did she have a lasting influence on the field of sociology, in the sense that people who came later would quote her works or would build on her theories?
Well, I don't think they quoted her works, but her theories certainly, you know, her idea that instead of studying history through the lives of men, you better look at the institutions and what the collective, how collective society works. And I think that was her real contribution. And no, I know, so far as I know, you know, I'd never heard of her until I did this research. And I think what happened was her methodology began to take hold and was improved upon. And that's why she's called the mother of sociology. And as you read her stuff, you realize that she was absolutely interested in every phase of everything, and a student of it. So I think that's really why she's considered the mother of sociology.
I guess I was just sort of wondering whether the late 19th century, early 20th century sociologists that people tended to study, Durkheim or Thorstein Veblen or people like that, whether they actually based, whether they knew about her, whether they based their works on her.
I can't answer that. I really don't know. I assume, since she was so widely known during her own life and lived, into the 1870s, that at least those people who were born and active the last quarter of the 19th century probably were aware of her and probably read, certainly her, these books I showed, her history of the 30 years of peace is a tour de force, and there's an enormous amount of information in it.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, to add on to Mike's question, I said it in the paper, but she was a better known writer at the time than Charles Dickens.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this is just a comment, but how sad that women felt they had to get a husband and everything was based on looks. You know, that's kind of changed, I hope. But, I didn't think she was ugly in the pictures.
I didn't either. That's why I had Bill put him up. I was just kind of attractive.
Janet, I had a question. Can you hear
Yes,
me?
sure. Yes, I can.
Ken, I'm not sure I can ask the question right because I'm not sure I understood. Towards the end, you were quoting her about something having to do with morals. And was it that you understood the morals of a society through society at large rather than the individual?
That's correct. And rather than studying history or looking at society through the lives of men or commentary of what individuals say, that if you study the institutions, I'll give you an example. You learn more about America's morals by watching Congress work than you do by listening to speeches.
We're in trouble.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Well, but another point that, in reading through all this and reading about the riots and all that sort of thing, I thought, but nothing has changed.
That's the point, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm. That's very true.
we're still human. We still act like humans and we still do a lot of human things,
Still make stupid mistakes too.
a lot of stupid mistakes.
Hey, Brenda, don't forget that when women were supposed to be married, and you said it had a lot to do with how they look, don't forget the money angle.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The
Absolutely.
money angle.
Wasn't just my
Yeah.
look, yeah,
If you didn't have a dowry, you were sunk.
we're in trouble.
I need 2 questions, Bert and Dave.
Okay.
Bert? He needs to unmute.
Okay. When she came over to the US during the suffrage period,
Yes. Abolition. Yeah.
abolition, okay. So a little bit before the suffrage, is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Her work with suffrage was in England.
Okay. So she didn't have any real relationship with the suffrage people in the US, like Susan B. Anthony or anything?
No, they came on a little bit later than she, I believe.
Oh, okay. Wasn't so-
Okay.
Because, yeah.
Yeah, that was the beginning of the 20th century, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure her ideas probably prevailed.
Of course, many of them were considered ugly as well.
Well, that's kind of knock on people, women who are powerful.
Well,
Women
and
that-
then,
Women that had a mind of their own and spoke it were supposedly ugly.
That's right. Had to be.
and the idea of beauty has changed also since then. You know, what they thought was pretty,
Mhm.
so. Dave? I think Dave had a question. And we can't hear you.
Oh, hang on.
Doesn't work. There it is. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I have what may be a trivial question. Where did she get the title, the Mother of Sociology? From you or from someone else?
No, she is generally referred to when I got that from the articles I read.
Okay. But if she's the Mother of Sociology, as Mike brought up, why isn't she widely recognized as
Yeah.
influential in sociology?
I think you have to think back on the major contributions of women of her particular period, which is really the first 3/4 of the 20th century. Think of Lord Byron's daughter, who was the
You
mathematician.
mean the 19th century?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Lord Byron's daughter, who was the mathematician. No one ever hears of her. I have to look her up every time to figure out who she is and what she did. And the French mathematician, the woman who contributed so much, we can't even remember their names.
Mhm.
Mary Shelley's the only one that I know that was a prolific
Okay.
writer,
Mhm, yeah.
Oh,
from-
but there were a lot of women writers at that
Yes.
time,
Right.
including some who had men's names like George Eliot.
Mhm.
Yeah, but no, Austen was writing during this was the period.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Bronte sisters.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. But there were a lot of women writers.
I think Ann Miller had a question.
Anne?
Can't hear her.
I've not. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well, it occurred to me that I always wondered about the incentive to create women's colleges in this country, which started about 1860 in that area. And when I was at a women's college a long time ago, but it's quite clear that none of this kind of ceiling repressed people because women had all of the roles in the college. They were the president of the association. They were, and when I went to graduate school at Yale, which clearly had been a male chauvinistic kind of thing, I never felt, because of the department I was in, which was a biochemistry department, I never felt this kind of thing. And one of the expressions that I understood was Maxine Singer was one of my classmates, and she went on to NIH as a section chief and things. And what she said was she had never felt a glass ceiling until she got to NIH, that it just hadn't existed. Now, she had gone not to an all-girls college, she'd gone to a co-ed one, but it was kind of in the eye of the beholder. And when I had told my chemistry professor, because at the school I went to, yes, everybody was expected to go out and get married, and that was what you were being trained for. But when I told my professor of chemistry that I had been accepted at Yale and I had support for my for funds, she was absolutely astonished, because this just had not been something that even occurred to her to encourage her students to go on.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's changed or not. I would doubt it.
That worked all her life. She was a professor. Interesting.
Well, I think so. I don't.
I think it's changed.
Yeah. My father got the first master's in chemistry from the University of Oklahoma, and his great granddaughter, my granddaughter, teaches advanced inorganic. She was an inorganic chemistry major. On and got her master's and so forth. I think women are very much encouraged to do that these days. But I do agree with you about the influence of women's colleges. I think they had a lot to do with encouraging women to go into fields that are not necessarily considered feminine.
Well, but let me say that when the women's colleges that were formed in the middle 1800s were only for little rich girls.
Oh, yeah.
Not,
No,
it was all about the upper class.
no, I don't think so. At least where I went, it was not true.
Well,
Hello? Even so,
like Smith and some of those schools, you had to have a lot of money to go there.
Well, what they did was accept a number of students because they could pay their way. And we didn't admire those students. I mean, but you knew that they were there. But then there were the rest of us who had no money, and the school would support.
But you were smart and you got a scholarship.
Oh, yes. Well, I told them I couldn't go unless I got a scholarship. That was true. And everything I made during the summer, I would put to college. And I was once told I was the poorest student in the college. It was probably true. Well, no, simply because my father didn't have any money.
You mean poor financially, not poor academically.
No, on the other part, I came out first in the class, so they weren't talking about the academic.
Good for you, Anne.
Okay, so my sister Ronnie has a comment or a question.
Okay.
Just a couple of nights ago, there was a special on PBS about the conscious and unconscious prejudice against women in the sciences.
Really? Oh.
No, it doesn't change that much.
No,
slowly.
Slowly is right. And there's unconscious prejudice against women for many other things too. I mean, I don't mean to sound like, bitter, but women are not expected to do certain things still today. It's less today.
Well, not as a writer, but as in the rest of my life, I always worked in fields which were dominated by men. And I did what a lot of women did. I ignored it, you know.
Good.
You just go on and do your job.
The surest evidence I would cite that women are making progress is the number of college presidents and of distinguished universities.
That's right. Yeah.
Other widely
CEOs, there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
When
Yeah,
my
but-
daughter went to grad school, which was just a few years ago, she's in her 40s now, and she went to GW. She was one of 5 women in the whole business school, the MBA program. 5. And that was in the 90s.
today.
The studies of labs show that women get given less and worse lab spaces in grad school, etc. So that of course affects the quality of work they can do, and they are assigned less interesting problems to follow in the sciences. That's what the show was about. But it isn't. Also, women make it hard for women because my daughter Julie Schwedogs, who is a biology major, said that women kind of insisted that the women under them that they were mentoring work day and night to prove they were just like men, which is not the way I want women to enter into any field of work. I want them to be able to change some of the bad ways the work is done.
Yeah. Well, and the biological function that men can't do, we have that. And, you know, sometimes it works against your career that you have to take maternity leave. I mean, it's not an easy, you know, I'm not saying that all women are woe is me, but I'm just saying they do have several roles besides their careers if they want a family. Any other questions? Good comments.
Anyway, thank you, everybody, for your
Thank you.
questions.
You, Janet.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, guys. You'll see you and put on your calendar May 18th. And as Mike mentioned in regard to next month, we do have a very distinguished speaker who is a lawyer who lives in Blue Ridge, and his specialty is elder care and estate planning, I believe. So that should be a very interesting program. Encourage the other Torch members and anyone new to please come. We're almost at the end of the pandemic, we hope. And, you know, I'd like to see our membership get back up and we can start eating and drinking again in our meetings too.
Amen.
So,
Yep. Yeah, well, hopefully in June, we'll all see each other.
yes, wouldn't that be nice?
Yep.
And thank you all for coming tonight. I know it's not easy to get set up on Torch. And Bill, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thanks, Brenda, for heading it up.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.